Miter Saw Workstation is complete, and I like it a lot. It's got a large work surface on the top. It's got plenty of additional storage, and there's just a ton of mass to this unit. The vibration has been reduced significantly. Even the sound level has gone down, and the accuracy of the cuts has gone up quite a bit. So it's turned out pretty good. The only thing that's not finished is the dust collection hood. And it's a little embarrassing, but I'll get to that in a little bit. We're going to cover the construction of this in 3 videos. In the first video, we're just going to build the top section. Then in the next video, we'll build the 2 pedestal bases. And in the last video, we'll do all the little detail things that have to be done to make this a miter saw station. Everything from the laminate to the T-tracks, to the fences, to the attachment of the top to the bases, of the attachment of the saw to the top. Keep in mind one very important thing as we go through these videos, and that's that this design is extremely flexible. If you want the top to be longer, you can make it longer. If you want to build only the top and put it on some cabinets or sawhorses in your shop, you can do that too. If you want to change the depth, change the height of this section, if you want to put in 2 drawers in one or 1 large drawer, you can do all of that. And I'll show you how you can modify those things, not just to fit your saw, but to fit your style of work. So let's get going. The first step in building the top assembly is to figure out how big you want it to be. Now I made mine with a little longer section on the right hand side because I do most of my cuts with the board over there on that side and then the cutoff piece on the left. You may do it the opposite way, or you may want both sides to be the same size. The main thing to remember is, in this design, you're looking for a degree of rigidity to hold up this saw. So it's very important, at least I think it is, that the bottom piece of plywood run all the way across be one single piece. So it sort of limits you to 96 inches, since that's the size of a sheet of plywood. I made this top 86 inches long, and it's plenty big. I haven't had any issues in cutting anything. So you figure out the size that you want to make it, but my hint is to make sure that this bottom piece is one contiguous piece the whole length. Then you need to figure out the size of the work table. You'll figure out that size by measuring your saw with a little clearance on either side. And then just decide how big you want the work tables. This top piece here, the piece that runs across to hold the saw itself, and this top piece over here are going to add up to be exactly 1/2 inch longer than the bottom piece that you put down here. And the reason for that is because this top piece gets mounted into dados in these vertical pieces here, and each of those dados is 1/4 inch deep. So you've got a piece here that's 1/2 inch longer than it would be otherwise. Other than that, no design restrictions whatsoever. When I was starting to build this and cut the dados for all of the vertical dividers, I kept thinking of a bookshelf. And if you think about this, if you were to take this top and stand it up, that's exactly what it would look like. A tall, skinny bookshelf. 2 sides and pieces that run horizontally in between, and those pieces set into dados. Lay it down, and basically what we've got is a very sturdy top assembly. Now I chose to put multiple vertical components in because I wanted the rigidity and the strength. I've got 4 vertical dividers here on this side and 3 on this side. In retrospect, this middle divider here was probably a little bit overkill. This could have been one large drawer or even two real skinny drawers stacked up. This over here could have probably had one divider in the middle and it would have been sufficient. They have a tendency to overbuild things. You do this however you want to. Remember though that the dados need to be cut very precisely. And the easiest way to do that is, again, go back to the bookshelf analogy. Think of taking the bottom piece and the top, opening it like a book, clamping those two pieces side by side together and running the router and making the dado straight across. Guaranteed they'll match up when you fold it back over and put it together. One caveat, because there's three top pieces and this piece is a ½ inch longer, you won't be able to lay all three top pieces next to the bottom piece at the same time. I laid this piece down next to the bottom, clamped it together, and ran my 4 grooves. I then went and clamped this top piece next to the bottom, ran these 3 grooves. I then took those 2 pieces and set them aside and put my center section lined up with these grooves with a 1/4 inch overlap on both sides, got it even, clamped it down, and ran 2 grooves across here to support the weight of the saw in the middle. Once you've done that, then you can go and rip these vertical pieces that you're going to need to go in here. Just remember that the length of those vertical pieces, you want to make them a little shorter in the back to accommodate whatever you put in as a back to this cabinet. After all the dados are cut and the vertical pieces are cut out, then it's necessary to mock up the assembly without the dado in the side of these 2 vertical pieces being cut. The reason for that is because you've got to cut those dados in exactly the right spot to get your saw at the right height. And remember, if you get this saw deck built a little too high, you're going to have a problem because there's going to be no way to level it with these tops on either side. If you build it a little bit too low, you can shim the saw up and get it perfect. Now I shot for building mine about 1/32 of an inch lower, so I would be using shims to get the saw perfectly level. You may want to change that, but that worked out pretty good. Now the way to do that is to go ahead and mock up the assembly, put these dividers into place, and then measure exactly where you want that to be and mark the location for the dados in the side of these vertical pieces in situ while it's in place. Once you get those marked, you can take those 2 vertical pieces, they're real small. You can run dados on those on a table saw or on a router table, or you can use your handheld router if you want to, and run those, and then you're set to go. I would still mock up the assembly one more time before pouring the glue to it, because you want to make sure you've got the assembly sequence down pat. There is a lot of glue to spread and a lot of joints here, and I wanted to use type 3 tight bond glue, and its open working time is really pretty short. It's about 15 minutes depending on the temperature. So you want to make sure you got the sequence down and that you can get this thing glued up all in one pass. Just a couple more words about the glue up. You want to make sure that this thing is just dead flat. That will really help in the accuracy in the future when you're making cuts on your miter saw. So I started by building a base on which I could assemble this top assembly. I set up some sawhorses, got those level. I put some nice straight 2x4s across it, and then I took a 3/4 inch piece of MDF cut to about the same width as the table itself, laid that across the 2x4s, and leveled that with some thin shims till I got it perfectly level. I then took the 3/4 inch plywood base, put that down on top, and assembled the tabletop on top of that. I have a 3-foot long steel straight edge from Veritas, which is absolutely dead straight, and I used that to make sure the top was perfectly flat as I was gluing it up. I used almost every clamp in my shop and got it all glued up, and decided to let it sit overnight so it could really be strong and sturdy before I proceeded to the next step. The next step in assembling the top was to cut out the back. And the back, as I said before, needs to be one continuous piece all the way across to give it rigidity. But the top needs to be cut to fit. So I found the easiest way to do that was to take the glued up top assembly and turn it up on its back on top of a piece of 1/2 inch plywood. I then reached down through each of the openings and traced the inside. Once I had an outline, I used a jigsaw and cut out the 1/2 inch plywood and glued it into place in the back. After the back was glued into place, I set the assembly aside for a little bit and started working on a couple other things. The first thing that I did was I took a bunch of poplar and ripped it to the same width as the thickness of the plywood. That's pretty easy to set up on a table saw. Just take a scrap of the plywood and put it up against the blade of your table saw and move the fence over until it just kisses the plywood, and your thickness will be just right. Now, of course, you could cut it a little oversized and then go back with a router and trim it, but that was a little bit too much pomp for these circumstances. I just cut it to the exact width and got it ready to glue on. The other thing I did while the back was drying was I made the drawers. Now, there's another video on my YouTube site about building drawers, the drawers that I built for the shop desk, workbench, clutter-catching table that I built not too long ago. I built these drawers exactly the same way. I got the drawer boxes ready, and I went ahead and got some poplar set up for the drawer fronts, but I didn't cut those out yet. After the top had dried sufficiently, the back in the top, I started applying the trim. And I went ahead and put the trim all the way around on the top to get the edges of the plywood covered. After I did that, I mounted the drawer slides and the drawers, got those into place, and I started cutting and fitting the drawer fronts. Went ahead and got all of that done, got that out of the way, so the top was pretty much finished except for the laminate, the T-track, and some of the other details. And we'll get to that in the third video. With the top glued up, the poplar trim hiding the plywood edges, the drawers built and faced, and the hardware in, then it was time to turn my attention to the pedestal bases for this project. And we'll get to that in the next video. Look forward to seeing you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.